So my client sends me an email saying like, the AI says we should go with rescission. I asked him, I'm like, are you ready to refund all the money that you were ever paid under that contract since now you want to claim that contract didn't exist? Because that refund was over $500,000. And I'm like, you got to pony up that money right now if you're going to say rescission, and we're going to have to proceed forward and then go attempt to reclaim that money anyways. So then he's like, oh, the AI didn't think about that. It's a pretty bad idea.
Welcome back to another episode of the Built to Finish podcast. Today's guest operates at the intersection of business, law, and risk, where most founders only start paying attention when something has already gone wrong. He has spent over 2 decades advising companies on how to structure, protect, and scale their business the right way, not just for growth, but for durability. Matthew Fornaro, welcome to the show.
Stephen, thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
No, pleasure. So tell us a little bit about your legal journey. What led you to become a lawyer?
Sure. So early on, I was growing up as a kid, I was a big fan of, believe it or not, the People's Court.
Oh my
So
God,
I
what a
like,
blast from the past.
yeah, the original People's Court with Wapner and the boys. So I like watching that. It was interesting because I saw like dispute resolution from not like really necessarily a business standpoint, but from a civil dispute standpoint where it's not family law or criminal law or something like that. So I was kind of fascinated by that. So that kind of sparked my interest in the law. And I kind of just went forward from there to me going to college, being a political science major, which means I was only qualified to either go live in Washington, D.C. or go to law school. So I went to law school. I came out and I wound up working for two large Am Law 200 law firms where I focused on commercial litigation, business litigation, representing big businesses, banks, and insurance companies. And then 11 years ago, I decided to leave big law. I had the opportunity to go to an even bigger law firm, but I decided I want to go start my own firm, and I wanted to focus on helping like small businesses, entrepreneurs, and startups. And that's what I've been doing the last 11 years.
I love it. A lawyer that was bitten by the entrepreneurial bug.
Yes, it was. It's been an interesting bug. It's been an interesting bug bite, Stephen.
I'm sure it's been quite the journey. So you help a lot of entrepreneurs with legal structures. What's the real cause behind delaying putting in the proper structure?
Well, it's interesting because from the entrepreneur side or from the founder side or whatever, a lot of people are very eager to just get into business and start doing stuff, and they don't really put in the necessary due diligence or background thought in consultations, various whatever you want to call it, before they kind of just arbitrarily pick something and go with it. So I think one of the issues is that, people are so eager to get into business, particularly if they're a first time business owner or whatever, that they don't do the necessary steps or the due diligence to do things correctly. And they just kind of arbitrarily pick something, go online to their Secretary of State website, register, and just go. And then the problem is that, you didn't really think about why you're an LLC or why you're an S Corp or why you're right, because you didn't consult with an attorney, an accountant, a banker, or whatever. You
Hmm.
don't have a written business plan in place. You don't have your governing documents in place. You just kind of started. And then in retrospect, then you find out, well, I should have done, A, B, and C before I just jumped in and started doing stuff. And then they kind of retroactively have to go fix stuff. And sometimes they switch business organizations, but most of the time, if they don't have the governing documents in place, they go back and put them in place. And if they don't have the written business plan, they go back and put in a written business plan. So a lot of the delay and a lot of thing is just people, it's delay on one end of putting the necessary steps in place and necessary pieces in place. But on the other hand, it's really jumping the gun and trying to get into business as quickly as possible and overstepping all those initial due diligence steps.
Yeah, it's so much easier to do it up front, right? Versus having to really rush through it in the 11th hour.
It is, and particularly because you're going to do things correctly. You're going to think things out. You're not procrastinating. You're doing proper business planning. You're going to talk with professionals and you're going to make the right decision as opposed to, having to fix things on the fly or do things in retrospect or do things reactively or retroactively.
Would all those steps be different if somebody's starting out and they definitely want to start with the end in mind, meaning a sale of or an exit of their business within, let's say, I don't know, 5 to 10 years, versus somebody that has no intention of selling and they just want to create some sort of lifestyle business or side hustle? Are the steps in the beginning different?
The steps really aren't different because it's all regardless of if you're gonna die at your desk one day when you're 80 or you're selling it in a couple years. It's pretty much the same formula where ideally you want to do everything the right way, do all the due diligence, put all the pieces in or whatever, so that the business operates, legally, efficiently, ethically, all that stuff. And then particularly if you want to exit the business, you want to make sure that you have the governing documents in place that literally say in them how you exit the business. Because if you don't have those in place, you're going to have problems because now you have to go to what your statute says or what the law says in the jurisdiction you're in, and you're not going to like it. So it's kind of the same formula for both, but especially if you have an ultimate exit plan in place. If you don't have those documents in place, then you're just buying yourself a headache later on down the road.
Yes. When you're under the pressure of due diligence and you've got a massive life-changing transaction staring you in the face, and you're missing your corporate governance documents and your resolutions and such.
Yeah, I mean, it's something you could have done, a couple of years ago that would have taken you, 20 minutes to answer a bunch of questions for an attorney, and an attorney would have given it back to you pretty soon, and it would be in place. Versus now, you have this whole monumental thing where you got a deal that's worth, however many figures that's held up on the fact that, oops, you didn't do it, when you started. Now we have to retroactively go put the documents in. We have to do a whole bunch of corporate resolutions or different, things in place in order for you to now be able to sell your business, which was your plan originally, but you didn't put the right stuff in place at the beginning. So now you have problems.
Speaking about selling, when do you think founders should start thinking about exit readiness?
I mean, I think there should be a little bit of planning when you start your business. If that's going to be your plan, is ultimately you want to exit your business. So you want to set it up like we were just talking about, making sure you have in your governing documents the requirements of how you sell your business, how you, get rid of your portion of the business, how you bring on investors, how you do whatever. So I think even before you start, there should be some aspect of that kind of put into the equation. And then obviously, when you get to a certain point where you've plateaued or you've hit whatever benchmarks or goals you want to hit and you're going to start seriously thinking about selling, then that's definitely the time to start doing from your seller point, due diligence, make sure everything's in order, whatever, for you to facilitate having as easy of a sale as possible that's not held up on technicalities on your end.
Yeah, agreed. I always tell clients that we should always be ready for due diligence because even though we're on a potentially 2 to 4 year journey to get to the right exit from a valuation perspective, you never know when an opportunity is going to present itself. So everything should be buttoned up as organized as possible, so that when an opportunity does present itself, we don't need to be scrambling in the 11th hour.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. And I mean, I see it all the time with people who are scrambling to retroactively do stuff or, oops, I forgot to file my taxes the last 2 years or just stuff that if you're going to be, sale ready, transfer ready, or whatever. I mean, there's a certain level of due diligence that you need to maintain at all times just so you can kind of step right into that and not have to scramble and do a bunch of, catch up kind of things that you should have had in place to begin with, not just if you wanted to sell your business, but to truly run a business the correct way.
You mentioned milestones and benchmarks. Is there a structural difference or any changes that are necessary once somebody hits this magic milestone of finally breaking through the $10 million mark?
Yeah, I mean, your business, running your business obviously is dynamic and subjective and objective at the same time. But I mean, you want to not just put the thing on autopilot and then come back when it's time to jump out of the plane and, pull the parachute. You want to make sure you always have your thumb on the pulse of what's going on. So you should always keep constantly reevaluating your business, your governing documents, your structure, things that you have going on every time that not only there's a major event in your business, even before you hit your certain threshold or plateau of where you want to sell or you want to transfer, but just in the ordinary course of business, anytime that there's a change or something, you want to make sure that it's reflected in your documents and reflected in how you run your business. And that's another reason why, you always want to make sure that you have a team of professionals you can consult with, whether it's a business law attorney, an accountant, a banker, whoever, where you can just kind of reach out to them on a periodic basis, not just when something changes in your business, but just reach out and be like, hey, here's how my business is going, whatever. Is there anything I should know about? Any changes in the law? Any issues where, my goal ultimately is I want to hit, $10 million and sell the business within the next 3 years. But should I know something that we didn't discuss previously to get me to that, or something I should do? So it should always be part of your due diligence and your ongoing, your business acumen, your business practice.
That's actually really good advice. People should be speaking with their attorneys and accountants on an ongoing basis, and not just around tax season or when something goes wrong and they need a lawyer.
Yeah, no, definitely. And, for accountants, I mean, your accountant is more, if you're a business owner, your accountant is more than a once a year relationship. It's not, here's my taxes, file them, please. I mean, that's someone who should always reach out to anytime you have a money issue or decision to make with your business. And same thing with an attorney. You just don't reach out to them when I've got a lawsuit, please deal with this. Or,
Right?
I want to get rid of my partner, please deal with this. It's an ongoing relationship that you should have with them.
Yep, agreed, agreed. Can you think of, from recent history, a very expensive mistake somebody made from a legal perspective?
Sure, Stephen. I can think of lots of very expensive mistakes that people make. That's what keeps
That's what
me in
keeps you in
business.
business.
The question should be, is there something that they didn't do that kept them out of
That that
trouble, which is
that
actually,
was my next question.
yeah. Just, I mean, expensive lessons go back to what I've been talking about, which is not doing the due diligence when you start your business. Because, like, a lot of what I do, is litigation based and, business litigation based. And a lot of what, if you want to put buckets of what I do or whatever, a huge bucket is, what we colloquially will call business divorce. Okay. So it's when two, three, four, however many people are in business, no matter whether it's a corporation, an LLC, a partnership, whatever, it's, they want out. They hate each other. Their spouses don't like each other. Their kids don't like, whatever it is, and they want out. And a common issue is that those same documents that aren't in place properly that we're talking about when you want to sell, well, they're also not in place properly a lot of the time when you got to try to kick someone out, where you try to get kicked out, where you try to buy someone out, where you try to sell and split the money. So that's a huge issue that a lot of people face, is that, not just from a everything's great and I want to sell the business standpoint, but when things break down between people who are in business together, if you don't have the documents in place and you don't have the plan in place, or you don't have the professionals in place, that's a huge economic lesson that I see all the time play out literally on a daily basis. Since that's a huge thing, particularly here in Florida where I am, where it's just, people, fall out of love regarding business. And it's,
Happens all the time.
it happens on a daily basis. Everyone goes into business with the best of intentions. Everyone's friends, everyone's family, everyone gets along, but, life happens and it breaks down. And that's a huge issue I deal with all the time.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's really uncomfortable, right? You come up with this great idea with a family member or with a friend. You jump into business together. Nobody wants to have the, you know what? Let's put it together a buy sell agreement, or let's make believe. God forbid we have to part ways in the future. Let's cross the T's and dot the I's now about how that happens. Nobody wants to have that uncomfortable conversation. But oh my God, does it cost them later?
Yeah, I mean, it's an uncomfortable conversation, but it's part of doing business, particularly part of doing business in 2026, because things happen and, you got to plan for things happening. Nobody wants it to happen, but if it happens, I mean, if you don't have it in place, you're going to pay with time, you're going to pay with money, you're going to pay with lost capital, you're going to pay with lost, revenue. So, I mean, have the uncomfortable conversation now instead of have the really uncomfortable conversation.
Hey everyone, just a quick reminder that the Built to Finish podcast is brought to you by Accresis. Accresis have helped over 30 founders generate over $1 billion in wealth via strategic acquisitions or investor recapitalizations. If you're the owner of a middle market company and want to explore what a potential exit will look like for you so that you can finally realize the value of what you've been working so hard on, please do contact Accresis via the website accresis.com or hit me up on LinkedIn for more information at Stephen Pivnik. Now, back to the show. Yep, I totally agreed. So besides these structural foundational documents that we've been speaking about, have you encountered any like major legal loopholes when a company got into due diligence? maybe it wasn't an organized, structured process. Maybe it was a last minute type opportunity. Were there any like huge legal gotchas that came up that hurt the deal?
Yeah, it's another thing of missing stuff. So just like how we have to have all the governing documents and stuff in place, if you have if you're a business and you have a relationship with another business, other people or whatever, it should be governed by a written contract. And unfortunately, a lot of, things are done, handshake deals or like, I send you an email and you say, "Oh, it looks great to me. We're in business." And the problem is that when you go to sell or you go to add people in or you go to borrow money or go to, in any kind of due diligence for any reason, people want to look at, okay, well, where are the documents? Let's see the financials. Okay, well, you have, you know, I'm just going to throw out, no, you got like, $1 million, $10 million in receivables or whatever. What the hell is this tied to? And it's like,
Mhm.
well, I don't have any contracts. I just have some invoices I sent out or whatever. Okay, well, that's a problem because, what happens if they don't pay? You don't have a contract in place regarding that. Or, you have a bunch of employees or a bunch of independent contractors or whatever, and they don't have an employment agreement or they don't have an independent contractor agreement or there's no employee handbook. And so now your due diligence, the people who want to acquire you or buy you, or is like, well, what's going on with your HR? Like, who's an actual employee here? Why are they an employee? Why have you classified these people as 1099 independent contractors? How do I know they're not really W-2 employees or vice versa? And so I've seen that happen a lot where it's just, it's all the due diligence stuff of getting into the granular minutia of things where, just like you have to have those governing documents, if you have a relationship with third parties, whoever it is in whatever context, it's got to be governed by a written contract that says what the relationship is. And just like the governing documents, what happens when someone doesn't do whatever and what your remedies are. And as much as, that's kind of not fun or, boring or, whatever, I mean, that's what goes into the due diligence and that what makes a deal be much smoother and, transaction friendly versus fall apart is, well, okay, here's all my contracts. Here's, all my receivables, my invoices, they're all based. Here's all my employees. Here's how they're classified. Here's my employment handbook. Here's, my systems handbook, where if you
Mhm.
want to acquire me, I should have written systems in place that say, not just from an employment standpoint, but from a, how does my business run? Well, page one, this guy's in charge and this guy does this, this, and this. And then page two, this guy is second in charge and this guy or girl does this, this, and this. And and if you don't have those documents in place and someone wants to purchase you, well, there's they don't know what they're purchasing. So those
Yeah,
are
I
all
mean, that just represents risk, right?
yeah. So
If that
those
type
are
of stuff isn't
all
documented, it's risk to the
yeah, and
acquirer.
those are all just very easy due diligence things that are, not necessarily common sense, but things where if they're in place, it's great. And if they're not in place, then you're gonna have problems.
Exactly, and like we mentioned earlier on other topics, these are so much easier to create when you're not under the stress of due diligence.
No, it is. It's definitely a lot easier to proactively and preventatively do it than try to fix it on the fly.
Yep. So it's impossible to have any conversation these days without AI coming up. How is just the availability of AI affecting you from a business perspective? Are folks just leaning towards Claude or ChatGPT for legal advice these days?
Yes. So, easy answer is Steven, I'm a huge AI fan. I love AI. I use AI in my law practice. I use AI in running my business. I use AI in my social media. I use AI for everything. However, I take responsibility over it and I make sure I quality check it. I make sure I fact check it. I make sure I legal citation check it if I'm using it in a legal context. And I make sure I take ownership of anything I send out to people or I put out there because the AI could be wrong, can hallucinate stuff. The AI can do whatever. And so my very quick thumbnail advice to any business owners, embrace AI, but take responsibility over it and check it out and make sure it's accurate before you use it. And I'll tell you in my practice of law from the client interaction receiving side, it's interesting because I would say 100% of my clients use AI, in some context. And it's interesting because they like to send me their AI and they like to have their AI second guess me or tell me what to do, which is interesting
Boy,
because Sometimes it's right, sometimes it's wrong, and they don't know it's right or wrong. They just say, well, the AI says do this, or the AI says do that. And look, I'll gladly review, with anything, with any client, I'll gladly review anything you send me. I'm not going to poo poo something you send me or say, I'm not going to, I'll look at it. But like I said, it could be right or it could be wrong. And if it's wrong, it could be really wrong. So, I'm not always right. I'm not perfect. I'll gladly look at whatever you say. But, a lot of the times my clients send me AI stuff that's just crap. And some of it's pretty interesting. Some of it's pretty good, but some of it's terrible. And I'll tell you a real quick story. I got
Yeah,
a
sure.
case. I have here's an AI example case where someone's trying to second guess me or have their AI out lawyer me, right? My own client.
Mm,
So I have a case that's in arbitration. All right. And, arbitration gets very expensive very quick or whatever. So, without getting into too many details, essentially it comes down to a breach of contract issue. Okay. So I represent the claimant who's the plaintiff, but in arbitration it's called claimant. Okay. So we're suing for a bunch of damages. Basically now we're up to probably seven-figure damages or whatever. Right. So we're going under a breach of contract theory and a bunch of related theories based on breach of contract. So my client sends me an email saying, like, the AI says we should go with rescission. And rescission, real quick, just in case people don't know, is when you say that not that you breached the contract, not that you didn't follow the contract and I'm right and you're wrong under the contract. Rescission is the contract never existed and we're just going to act like it never existed and we're going to proceed under alternate theories. Okay. So I tell my client, I'm like, are that's pretty out there, dude. I mean, we've been going with this whole contract theory for a really long time and that's a totally different theory. And one of the things is that if you're going to go with that rescission theory, you have to act like the contract never existed. And one of the things was that he got paid under the contract. So I asked him, I'm like, are you ready to refund all the money that you were ever paid under that contract since now you want to claim that contract didn't exist? Because that refund was over $500,000. And I'm like, you got to pony up that money right now if you're going to say rescission and we're going to have to proceed forward and then go attempt to reclaim that money anyways. So then he's like, oh, the AI didn't think about that. It's a pretty bad idea. And I'm like, well, there you go. That's why you go with the attorney over the AI. But that's just an example of where, a client's coming and telling me, the AI says this, maybe we should, and it's just a terrible idea. But again, I reviewed it. I, took it. I objectively looked at it. Horrible idea, catastrophic consequences. And, if he would have done that himself, he would have lost his ass. But, that's why you need a professional, whether it's an attorney, an accountant, a banker, a doctor, or whoever. When AI tells you to do something, you need someone to say whether it's right or wrong or not.
yep. Do you have any examples personally when you use it for yourself and your business where it's gone wrong and obviously you caught it?
Yeah, happens all the time. The AI hallucinates all the time. And I mean, for legal stuff, I'm using like closed universe AI that doesn't have like an open model. It's like limited solely to learned legal treatises and things that are supposed to exist. And it still puts out wrong information that I have to fact check and proof check and whatever. And it's interesting because I actually, on one of them, like, I'm just like, what the hell is this, man? I'm like, this is literally not supposed to happen. So I went to and I'm not going to name the name or whatever, but I went to the company, whatever you want to call it, the manufacturer of the software company. And I'm like, look, here's my chain. Here's everything that happened. Okay. You claim this is a closed universe. How the hell did this thing hallucinate this stuff if it's a closed universe and it's not supposed to be able? And so their dumb response to me, which took them like 2 weeks to come up with, was like, the AI wanted to give you the right answer and it was programmed to give you the right answer, but through an execution error, it gave you the wrong citation. And I'm like, well, good thing I check everything because if I would, rely on your AI and I turn that in and someone checked it, they'd be like, red flag sanctions, all kinds of stuff. So it happens. And that's why it's great. It's a time saver, force multiplier, gets you lots of information, lots of data, whatever, but you got to fact and proof check it no matter what it is whatever platform you're using, because there's no such thing as a hallucination proof platform, even in a closed system. and you got to make sure you take ownership of it and you check it out.
Agreed. Totally agreed. So just curious, just from a personal perspective, what's your AI platform of choice? And has that changed recently?
My AI platform of choice, well, I got a lot of AI platforms of choice, Stephen. We don't have enough time to discuss all my AI platforms, but I'm trapped on a desert island and I only got one thing AI platform is Chat GPT. And it's interesting because there's a lot of, from my industry, from the legal industry, Claude is trying to push itself that there's a lot of legal specific plugins and a lot of legal specific stuff for you to use Claude. So I've been checking out a little bit on Claude, but the problem is that, I don't want to sound weird, whatever, but I'm so proficient and prevalent and nuanced in Chat GPT on how I use it in my business
Hmm.
that it works. And when it doesn't work, I check it and make sure that I fix it so that it works. And I don't want to have to go into a whole new system, just because it may have marginally better results or something to go do it. And it's not at that point yet. At some point, I may hit that point, but I mean, I've been using ChatGPT now for, over 4 years, like since its infancy, and it's gotten way better. It's way
Yes.
smarter, learns easier, puts out way better work product than it did 4 years ago. But, it's like, I'm in so deep I can't get out. Well, that's how it is.
And it knows everything about you. It's got
Yeah, and I
4 years
mean,
of
the
history on
history
you.
is all there as far as me having to put stuff in or whatever. So, like I said, there's some stuff that tries to get niche and like tries to appeal to certain industries or whatever because they say they have plugins or whatever, but it's not to the point where it justifies me leaving that platform.
No, great, great. Well, continue your relationship with Chad. I've had a similar road, but I've recently started playing more and more with Claude, and very, very impressive enhancements there as well. And and now I've heard Copilot has come a long way. So it's going to be a multi-horse race for a very
Yeah.
long time.
Yeah. Well, it's like with anything with the internet or whatever, I mean, 30 years ago, you and I would be face to face with a tape recorder talking about how great we thought Netscape was, and Netscape's the greatest browser of all time. And then Netscape was dead within a decade. So,
Exactly.
the same thing with anything else, AOL. Who didn't have AOL? That was the only way to get to the internet. AOL's dead. So it's all, it's just a technology cold war, hot war, whatever you want to say, where it's just whatever platform's hot works. And, 20 years from now, will there even be a chat GP? I don't know. There'll probably be something, that someone can't even fathom at this point that comes
Yeah,
in, goes
exactly.
whatever.
The current AIs will invent their replacements or
Yeah,
successor.
exactly. So maybe Netscape comes back. Who knows? I don't know. You
That
know?
would be hysterical. Awesome. Well, Matthew, thank you so much for taking the time today. I really enjoyed our conversation, and thank you for sharing all of this great legal advice. Where can folks get a hold of you if they have any follow-up questions?
Or Steven, just go to my website, which is fornarolegal.com. It's just my last name, FORNAROLEGAL.com. It's got all my contact information, all my social media, all my blog posts, all my videos. And, if you have any questions or whatever, just reach out to me. I'd be glad to answer them. And if I don't know the answer, I know someone who's actually a real human who does, who I can refer you to. So
Non-AI.
non AI. They may use AI, but they're real people. So
I love it. Again, thank you very much for being on the show. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in to another episode of Built to Finish. If you've enjoyed the show, please do like and subscribe. It helps the show tremendously. Thank you very much for tuning in. And until next time. That's a wrap for this episode of Built to Finish. Thank you for tuning in. For show notes and more details, head over to podcast.stephenpivnik.com. Special thank you to our sponsor, Acresis, offering tailored, high-impact advisory services that help founders get to their finish line with a strategic acquisition or majority investor recapitalization. Catch you next week.